So, do you want to take a look outside your window today? Because it's springtime. Spring is sprung, lawns are needing mowing, the flowers are blooming, and the pests are here to stay. But the right here and right now is Oscar season for most teenagers. For springtime signifies the joys of prom season. And what better way to kick off the beginning of the end of one's senior year of high school than to discuss the importance of prom season do's and don'ts that we can all learn lessons from the 1976's psychological horror film, Carrie. Where to begin in regards to this film is kind of a loaded yet very good question to ask. This film can be considered a horror film first and foremost, that much is true. Yet at the same time, this is a tragic coming of age story for a young, naive teenage girl who was sheltered by her Catholic driven mother her whole adolescent life. In fact, so sheltered that she learns about womanly changes to her body amongst her peers out in broad daylight, and is belittled about her self-discovery from her classmates. However, to everyone's total surprise, including Carrie herself, what was once considered a terrifying experience invoked a supernatural awakening within Carrie she never knew she had. Today, let's explore a little bit about how Carrie obtained these powers to begin with, along with some other lingering questions involving Carrie's everyday lifestyle. And we'll begin with Carrie White herself. Namely, just how and where did Carrie develop the ability for telekinesis? Is Carrie considered a metahuman? I think it's safe to say that throughout the entire duration of this film, we, the audience, never witnessed any form of historical flashbacks of Carrie's childhood or any sort of backstory prior to Carrie's first demonstrations of her newfound abilities. So we never seen how Carrie develops in the past to get to this point towards unlocking her abilities, except for the infamous plug it up locker room scene, which we will not be showcasing this scene for legal reasons. Some may argue that she was naturally born this way with unrealized abilities, but would manifest themselves only after reaching full physical adult-like maturity. In Carrie White's case, that's having to experience her very first menstrual cycle as a fully matured female. This unaware and unprepared, life-changing moment in Carrie White's naive-minded teenage life was visibly traumatizing for her, as it honestly would be for any audience member facing the same situation. Having to also endure the added mockery and humiliation piled upon Carrie all at the same time for her first steps into adulthood, Carrie physically reacted in a very similar way to what any random physical object will react while encased in great levels of stressful pressure. The gravity of things combined would cause a physical spark or tiny explosion. Now, I want to believe that Carrie's humiliation from her peers was the exact catalyst that sparked her new abilities, as raw and uncontrolled as they appeared to be. But these were just Carrie's first steps towards what she's truly capable of. Now, to think that this could have been completely avoided if only Carrie's classmates were at all sympathetic to her needs, actually helping and educating her in her time of need. But nope, no chance of that at all. All of them collectively decide to have their fun and embarrass this girl. If they only knew what their cruel intentions were truly doing to her, they would have never simply handed Carrie the keys towards unlocking Pandora's box. But these abilities of hers had to come from somewhere, right? Somewhere, or better yet, from whom? So we must consider exploring deeper into the first and most obvious answer, Carrie's biological parents. Let's start off with a closer look into Margaret White. That's Carrie's self-righteous, religious nut of a mother whose non-flinching faith in God rules over any and all else. God is the final word in every decision she makes. Margaret White truly believes that no one is religiously saved without the aid of her fellowship teachings of the Lord. And that would go double with Carrie White's circumstance having no choice but to live in that same house. Now, from the audience's observations, there's no modern day conveniences within Carrie White's house. That's no TVs, no radios, no sort of relaxation comforts, or forms of entertainment outside of Carrie's Bible, which is more than enough in Margaret White's style of parenting. Margaret's blind faith in God is unwavering, but does she actually contain suppressed abilities of her own? Abilities that were never witnessed before by the audience. So we'll revisit this one particular question once more before this video concludes today, but this one follow-up question must be answered. Was Margaret White self-aware of Carrie's natural-born abilities from childbirth? If that really was the case, and this is true, then it would make sense, it would make total sense as to why Margaret chose to completely avoid disclosing to Carrie about pending menstrual cycles, knowing the true power that lies dormant within her blood. The power she believes was brought on by Hellspawn, but it could be renounced. Margaret may have been waiting to see whether Carrie's abilities would either manifest itself or not, and praying endlessly for them not to ever surface, for she knew she'd had to directly deal with Carrie within a biblical resolution. But as things stand presently, Carrie herself was the only one demonstrating powers on screen here. But that does not technically mean that Mother Margaret was completely powerless, because her Catholic faith and religion would bound Mother Margaret from ever desiring to demonstrate her abilities to others, and that would definitely include Carrie herself. And then we have Carrie's unseen father. We don't know a great deal of information about Carrie White's father other than his name. And his name is Ralph. Ralph White, I'm presuming? Maybe. We don't really know. Now, according to Mother Margaret on screen's backstory on Ralph, she felt unrelenting measures of self-pity and guilt, having to succumb to drunken premarital intercourse with this Ralph, her future husband, on one lonely night. Margaret describes a detailed incident where Ralph stood above her with that look in his eyes. I presume the look of lust is what she's describing. She said at this point, Ralph did kneel to pray together hand in hand for forgiveness, but that she could also smell the stink of drunken whiskey on his breath. And with that continued look in his eyes, he then proceeded to, quote unquote, take her as she described. Now, so with premarital relational guilt still stirring deep within her subconscious, she did mention that she wished she had the strength to unalive Carrie during birth, but decided to keep the baby instead. This is the only backstory we have at all on Carrie's unknown and unseen father. But did he in any way possibly pass along any form of inherited powers to Carrie? Now, I want to believe if that's simply based on their shared religious faith, that there could have been a 50-50 chance that he passed along something to Carrie. We know almost nothing about this man's bloodline, so anything exposed at this point is a possibility, just very unlikely, including traces of witchcraft, but that is unknown. But we're not going to dive any deeper than we must down this particular rabbit hole. This subject is on Carrie's powers and how she's come to acquire them in this film. And this film fails to explain in any great details or any details at all, really, on how this came to be for Carrie. All we do get to witness is Carrie's brief moments of researching on her own on what telekinesis is and how it works. But for no matter the reason, honestly, Carrie now possesses powers of unknown origin and has been growing stronger day by day. Her unseen rage makes her incredibly powerful, which we'll dive in a little deeper into that in just a few moments. So moving on from that, it's visually seen by the audience that Carrie doesn't possess any friends outside of her relationship with her own mother. No one of her peers is seen conversing with her in a friendly, social manner, which is sad and hurtful when you take Carrie's situation into your own perspective. And to today's day and age, Carrie would be known as a severe social reject with no one to call as a personal friend. And I personally see this as a very dangerous scenario waiting to happen for anyone that's in Carrie's field of vision with the abilities that she possessed. And with Carrie having no friends to call her own, this would lead into a good follow-up question to be asked, involving Sue Snell. Was Sue Snell really becoming Carrie's one and only friend? During the beginning of this film, Carrie is completely mortified and embarrassed by her gym classmates, which included Sue Snell. None of them came to her aid. But that's not to say this is completely cut and dry. I feel ultimately, if it wasn't for Sue Snell, we the audience wouldn't have witnessed the climactic and terrifying ending this film produced. But one must consider this one fact. They never really had a one-on-one conversation between Carrie and Sue, not like Sue's boyfriend did. That's Tommy Ross. Sue requested to her boyfriend, who's Tommy Ross, to ask Carrie out as his official date to the senior prom. And despite some convincing of sincerity from Tommy, Carrie finally did accept his offer. And having accepted that offer, things seemed to be going her way. She was happy and she was mindful of having a good time at the prom. Little did they both know that Carrie's classmate peers were setting a trap for Carrie, and that trap backfired on anyone who attended this prom night. You see, none of them knew the powers Carrie possessed until things were way too late, except for maybe the gym teacher. Now, the gym teacher kind of witnessed what Carrie could do, but I believe she just disregarded it. She never questioned what she saw in the principal's office. But that's neither here nor there. One thing led to another, and they're all fighting for their lives to escape the wrath of vengeance. And just prior to Carrie's vengeance, was Carrie's gym teacher really actually laughing at Carrie or not during the blood bucket scene? When looking closely at the scene, Carrie was under severe trauma of embarrassment, which may have led to some self-hallucinations. It's kind of unclear, but I'm going to assume that what we're watching is what she's really seeing. Well, maybe. We, the audience, are seeing through Carrie's eyes through this scene. Is what we're seeing factual or truth, or just a hallucination of the gym teacher laughing at Carrie? I'm not going to put anything past the possibilities of the gym teacher actually breaking down and thinking that this situation is funny, but whether this happened or not doesn't really matter. Carrie believes in her mind that what she saw was reality. That's all that was needed to set things in motion for tragedy. But Sue Snell did try her best to stop the blood bucket incident from happening, but was stopped and thrown out by school authorities, which saved Sue's life, but sealed the fate of everyone else inside the building. That's extremely heavy guilt to carry for the rest of one's life. And this is a question that should be answered. Is Sue Snell solely responsible for everyone dying on prom night? And would this incident never happen in any other situation outside of prom night? Well, probably would never know, because to be honest, Carrie was a homebody. I think it's hard to tell considering that Carrie was only seen going to school and then coming home. Carrie was never really known to be a normal adolescent teenage girl going out on her free time and having fun and meeting people. Carrie was a sheltered homebody teenager, which never really had her social skills tested. To say that this would have happened anyway, outside of prom night, chances are she probably would have done this at a much, much older age and maybe less socially awkward. And you would have to get Carrie pretty mad for her to want to hurt someone. But all in all, Carrie does return home from her night of havoc at the prom, see the house completely decked out with hundreds of burning candles, which look very symbolic, almost ritual-like. But to what purpose did her mother do this? Carrie's mother had intentions waiting for her back home, and they weren't very good ones at that. We, the audience, heard what she said earlier prior to her going to the prom. Mother Margaret had that look in her eyes when saying, and I quote, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." So after Mother Margaret laid her premarital confessions at the feet of Carrie, she proceeded at attempted dismay of her only daughter by stabbing her in the back with a very long, sharp butcher's knife. But Carrie counterattacked her own mother with a flurry of sharp knives and stabbing weapons of her own. And Margaret does die in a pose of a biblical way, but what we saw was to happen next. Margaret's final attack on Carrie, that would be the destruction of the house. There's no clear reason why the house began to crumble all on its own directly after Margaret dies. What even caused this to happen? It never really made sense to the audience, and after watching it repeatedly, I still don't understand why the house crumbles. It simply appears the house begins to rumble and collapse in on itself for unknown reasons, followed by the final dream sequence jump scare to leave that lasting impression on your way out the theaters. So overall, I personally feel that this film displays a very loud and clear warning of how multiple levels of cruelty among peers and even parental authorities can push individuals over the edge of their own overstressed sanity. This film marks a very clear example of one not knowing who you're dealing with until it's too late. And this film of Carrie is a modern day story told in the 1970s. Factoring in the dangers of today's addictive outlets of social media and YouTube, cruelty among peers now had the potential to extend globally to perfect strangers, causing to amplify someone's embarrassment or their vengeance. But you simply can't deny the fact that Carrie White was an innocent, wholesome victim that was pushed over the edge. But that's not to say Carrie White's retaliation was at all justified. Murder in the first degree is a sin in God's eyes, and Carrie grew up knowing that. Her powers made her dangerous when she drops all morals and has no faith in others. You've become what you swore to God would you never be: wrathful. So in closing, let this film serve as a warning of compassion to all those would-be mean girls and male bullies who enjoy picking on individuals who appear weaker than them. Inner strength comes in many shapes and sizes, big or small. So never underestimate who you don't know. There may come a day when their love is powerful enough to save you, but their hate is even stronger to end you. And with that being said, I am Musical Weapon. Come back again. We'll do this again.